Where's the one place to go when you just want to disappear? To just never be found? To get chewed on by creepy creatures, you know? Well, in the woods, of course. Today I've got some allegedly true and scary in the woods stories, cause in the woods stories are just way too comfy. Enjoy. If you want your story narrated, send it to me at darkstories.org. But if you have a scary story from work, send it to me at eriecast.com/submit. By the way, if you're a fan of this podcast as well as my other shows, Freaky Folklore and Redwood Bureau, and you hate ads, go to eriecast.com/plus and try a 14-day free trial of ErieCast Plus. You get all our shows, no mid-roll ads, just the occasional host-read sponsorship because I still haven't figured out a good way to remove them. Thanks. Now, let's begin. River from Guardiantales. I grew up in a house just above a river in Washington State, which is where the following events occurred. I am the youngest of 4 children. When I was 12 years old, my oldest sibling was no longer living with us, and none of the other children had any experiences with paranormal things of any kind while living in the house. Our house was isolated from everyone. We were literally surrounded by heavily forested woods. I grew up in the quiet of this forest, always alert for bear and elk when out exploring, and falling asleep to the rushing sound of the river at night. I remember only feeling safe when I was out in these woods alone. My father was abusive to me and my siblings and my mother. He was especially cruel to our pets and would often injure them in front of us. I hated him. When I was 10 years old, he became ill and went to see the doctor, and that's where he learned he had acute lymphocytic leukemia and was given approximately 6 months to live. He lived for another 2 years though, one day passing away at home. He was buried on the property where he passed. Cremated, his ashes were set into a huge rock, which set below our house in full view in the path of the river. A friend of the family came and drilled a hole into the rock and set the urn inside, then cemented the hole over, leaving it smooth with no inscription. There was no funeral, no memorial service of any kind held. His ashes remain there to this day. Shortly after my father's death, I was alone in the house in the early evening, sitting curled up on the couch, reading. We had a dog at the time named Pete. He was half black Labrador and half Irish setter. He was a rather large dog, weighing about 100 pounds, and he looked like an overgrown black Irish setter. Pete was sleeping on the floor at my feet, and across from and to the left a bit from us was the overstuffed chair which had been my father's favorite. I was quietly reading, and Pete was asleep, when I suddenly felt a presence in the room with us. I looked over at the empty chair, and I could see that the seat cushion had compressed several inches, as though someone was sitting there right now. The sense of not being alone continued, but I didn't feel afraid. I decided to ignore the phenomena and went back to my book. My lack of fear may have been because I could sense no animosity or danger in the presence. It was just there. I remember telling myself that it was just my imagination, and I probably would have believed that, except for Pete. Pete suddenly awoke from a sound slumber and looked over at the empty chair. I remained where I was, quietly watching to see what he would do. He watched that chair for a minute, and then began wagging his tail while lying down, thumping it on the floor. He got up, went over to the chair, and lay down again, curling himself as though to accommodate feet I couldn't see. He continued to look upward at the chair, while thumping his tail on the floor again. I don't know what he saw. I couldn't see what he did, but I did clearly see the long hair on his neck and shoulders get repeatedly smoothed down in a rhythmic motion, as though someone were petting him. Eventually, the presence went away. Pete went back to sleep, and I continued to read. First night at the cabin. From Anonymous. It was mid to late August 2016. We had just closed on the purchase of a 1.5-story log cabin bordering the Ouachita National Forest. This was a property with about 15 wooded acres, 2 ponds, and a wet weather creek. I'd fallen in love with the area on the drive to see the property. Driving along the winding mountain highways, I couldn't imagine anything more beautiful to look at than the tree-covered mountaintops. What I saw was a rolling sea of trees, a welcome distraction from the shoulderless edges that dropped off into dark, creepy, rocky woods below. The air felt different out here. It was lighter and easier to breathe. I was ready to begin unloading things as soon as we signed the papers to close and were handed the keys. After unloading some of my things, my 8-year-old son and I were back on the road to load up some more things, and then drive to pick up my father the next day to show him our new cabin. Once we arrived, it was already pretty late in the evening. Due to our long drive, we were all ready to call it a night. My father passed out in an oversized quilted hammock in the living room, and my son and I had a queen-sized air mattress in the master bedroom upstairs. We hadn't been in bed long before I heard what I presumed to be some unusual birds making a woot sound. There were 3 distinct vocalizations. I wondered what kind of bird these sounds were from, and why was it so loud at this late hour. Soon I heard little things hitting the glass, as if swarms of bugs were flying into the glass, possibly at the sliding glass door to the back deck. It continued, and it seemed excessive. I went to look to see what it was, and little twigs and pebbles were hitting the deck after bouncing off the glass. I heard something rather large coming from the tree line behind the cabin. I could also hear branches breaking, leaves rustling, and I kept hearing thuds, which sounded like large rocks were being tossed or pounded into the ground. It was so unexpected, but I thought there were many animals accustomed to the property being vacant. It could be a black bear, I thought. However, I then heard the knocking sounds. This was unmistakably the sound of a piece of wood being used to knock into a tree. At that point, all I could think of was Bigfoot. There was a very heavy downpour coming down around 11:30 p.m. There could have been lightning and thunder, but I didn't really notice. This rain was so heavy, I couldn't be certain if those things were still out there. The noises seemed to have stopped. I didn't even attempt to sleep because I was thinking so many things about what had just taken place. And to be quite honest, I had never actually believed in Bigfoot stories or those shows on TV. But did Bigfoot really knock on trees? That always seemed so far-fetched to me. And did Bigfoot make weird hoot and holler sounds? If not a Bigfoot, then what really was it? Finally, the rain stopped, and it still seemed peaceful outside. At least for a while. It wasn't long before the branches breaking and tree-splitting sounds began again. Another set of loud and aggressive knocking came again on the trees just in front of the cabin, below where we had been the whole night. This was soon followed by a big bam against the cabin wall below. This shook the entire structure and scared the heck out of me. I quickly woke up my son and took him to a room I felt safer to be in. I didn't trust those sliding glass doors, and I don't know why I'd think the flimsy office door was safer, just being out of sight. I turned on the deck light and the front and back porch lights. I opened the upstairs office window and yelled out, "Leave us alone! We're trying to sleep!" I checked all the windows, then opened one slightly to listen. And all was quiet now, except my son, who was complaining that I woke him up at 4:30 a.m. My dad then woke up, checking all the windows. He started to talk to my son. My dad was upset that I didn't wake him up yet. At daylight, he insisted we go out and walk around the cabin, looking for evidence of this wild experience. I didn't see all the broken branches or big rocks that I'd heard the night before, though I did notice later the tree in front of the porch was nearly split in 2. That tree's trunk was easily 8 centimeters around. My father is the one who found footprints, which I never would have found myself. They were pressed into the mud through the fallen yellow and brown leaves, and there were 3 of them, 3 very large human-looking footprints. No claws, no nails. There was also an ape-like, juvenile-sized handprint. These prints were going up to the stone walkway leading to my covered, wraparound porch. My dad insisted that it must be a black bear, but has since become a believer, thinking it may have been Bigfoot. As I write this, I'm wondering if that first woot was an announcement of their presence or greeting. It is strange that they stopped harassing us once the lights came on. I also wonder if hearing my voice directed at them had made some kind of impression. There really should be classes on proper Bigfoot etiquette for moving into their neighborhood. From what I hear, they can be pretty bad neighbors, and if you cross them, they'll come for you. Gold Hill Chupacabra from C. Philly 100. This story is from my old roommate and a mutual friend of ours, M and T respectively. I grilled them both individually and had them retell the story. We used to live in a little log cabin up in Gold Hill, Colorado, the first actually profitable mining town in Colorado, and second home to rock star singer-songwriter Stephen Stills of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. We didn't have any running water, but the compound itself is a true Colorado mountain gym, surrounded on all sides by national forest and BLM. We frequently saw bobcats, coyotes, mountain lions, and black bears wandering around the grounds with nary a care in the world. West of town by a couple of miles is a Forest Service road that takes you out to some pretty massive cliffs. One morning, my two friends, M and T, and their dog Duke Sr. were rock climbing out there. When it started getting dark, they decided to head back to the truck. They somehow got a little turned around and wound up on the wrong ridgeline. They turned around and, to their surprise, there was a black bear on the trail behind them. The bear sauntered off, so M and T retraced their route back up to the proper ridgeline. When they made it to the intersection of the two adjoining ridgelines, they saw what they thought was a mangy mountain lion in the failing light up ahead on the hillside. M rushed towards it with his flashlight and shotgun to get a better look. The supposed mountain lion jumped back behind some rocks, and when M got around the corner to get a better look at it, he saw this was no mountain lion at all, but some kind of creepy, cat-like, flesh-covered creature with skinny arms and legs and razor-sharp claws on its flesh-covered hands. The beast, being cornered, then did something truly strange. It closed one eye, and the remaining open eye started changing colors. It then lifted up its forearms, which had some sort of flesh-like wing flaps, almost like a flying squirrel, connecting from the arms to the body. Then it leapt up into a tree a good 15 to 20 feet away. M followed the thing with his flashlight as it began to jump from tree to tree, never taking its one eye off of him, until soon it was out of sight. During this encounter, Duke Sr. had run away, and when M&T got back to their truck, Duke Sr. was in the bed of the truck, and that thing was in there with him. M ran to the back of the truck, the creature jumping out and running off into the woods. Duke Sr., a dog that had fearlessly fought off mountain lions and coyotes without so much as a whimper, was now literally shaking with fear. When I asked M what he thought it was, the only thing he could muster was, I don't know, man, a chupacabra? The Wailing Resident from Young Atlas. These hauntings happened to my family back in 2005. I was 15 when we lived in a house on top of a hill in Selangor, Malaysia. My dad was a director at one of the main city councils, and we were provided a large bungalow to stay during his tenure. We lived there temporarily while our own house was being renovated. This house was located on top of a hill overlooking the city, with a long stretch of road with 10 individual houses for other officers and some privately owned. At the back was the woods, and people rarely drove there as it was owned by the state police. Each house had 6 rooms and was very spacious. There were no gates between houses. There's a rule here: when a building is left unoccupied for some time, it will be inhabited by otherworldly residents. So some of the houses in that area had families in them, but half of them were always empty. And it seemed my family got one of the haunted ones. My parents' younger sister, the maid, and I lived in that house. I had neighbors living in the house on the left. However, the house on the right had been empty for years. Everyone except my sister experienced some weird happenings. The following was what each of us experienced. 1 month after moving in, things began to happen. At 3:30 a.m. one day, my parents were already up for morning prayer. While my dad was upstairs, my mom went down to the kitchen to make some coffee. The dry kitchen's entrance faced the bottom of the staircase. While she was making coffee with her back facing the entrance, she heard someone walking down the stairs. Then, she felt arms wrap around her abdomen tightly and a resting head on her shoulder, with breathing coming down her back. Still groggy from sleep, she let the arms tighten, thinking it was my dad. But then she saw the arms. They were pale, frail, and a bit clammy. The figure was almost the same height as her as well. All these traits did not match my dad. In a panic, she pushed away the figure and turned around. She saw that there was no one there. By then, my dad had just started to come down the stairs. "What's up, honey? You all right?" he said when he reached the bottom. He had an eyebrow raised at my mom's panicked state. "Did you just hug me?" my mom asked. "No," my dad responded. "I just got down here." "Don't mess with me, it's too early for pranks. I swear someone just hugged me," she said nervously. They went quiet for a while, and my dad went around to check the ground floor. He didn't find anything suspicious, so they let it slide. But things were only just beginning. Both my parents were very strong-willed and religious, so I think it liked to challenge them the most. A few weeks after this morning incident, it happened again. The master bedroom had a balcony attached to it. As it was a small space, the balcony only had a wooden door as an entrance. One night at 2 a.m., something began to knock at the balcony door. It started with a soft, continuous knock that woke them both. Then it escalated like someone banging on the door trying to knock it down. "Who's there?" my dad shouted, thinking it might be robbers. What replied chilled them to the bone. Something began to wail at the other side of the door. Quickly getting over his shock, my dad began to get angry and prayed loudly to chase this thing away. The banging reached a peak and stopped. After that deafening sound, there was just silence. Then there came this odd, sweet, flowery scent. They didn't need an explanation to figure out something had visited them. Sometimes on other nights, it was scratching, the sound of sharp nails against that wooden door. The maid's room was the last room in the house, next to the laundry room and the kitchen area. Since the first day of moving in, I got a cold vibe whenever I looked at the dim corridor leading to the maid's room. It was cold, and the darkness under the maid's bed was visible even from the corridor. A few months after moving in, the maid shared with my mom what had been happening around the house when all of us were gone in the morning. Some weird things also happened at night. In the morning, the maid could hear soft footsteps upstairs, and at night, she could hear someone in the kitchen opening the cupboard, clicking the ceramic mugs, and rustling the cutleries. At first, she thought it was one of us, but the kitchen light was never on, and the footsteps could sometimes be heard running in the kitchen. It liked to run across the laundry corridor, stopping in front of the maid's room, then doing it all over again. To her luck, her contract finished a few months later, and I think she was quite glad to be gone. In between my house and the neighbor's house on the left was a mango tree. It was big, reaching up to the second floor, just outside my bedroom window. Back then, I was told that tree had an occupant, or an owner. After 2 years living in that house, The tree had a singular mango fruit. It was average-sized, bright yellow, hung low from the tree, and seemed easy enough to pick. But my mom warned us not to pick it. As the neighbor warned us, sometimes at night an occupant could be seen underneath it. But either the neighbor's son didn't get the memo or just didn't believe in the superstition, because he decided to pluck it. That midnight, their house was visited by a crying figure. It was standing under the tree and was seen wearing a long white dress, and it had long black hair flowing down its back. Usually it was quiet, but that night it was wailing and began to circle that house. The house had plenty of glass windows and sliding doors. It woke the neighbor's maid when it stood outside her bedroom window. That window's curtains were closed, but the light from the moon was bright enough to outline the figure. Its sobbing voice was clear outside the bedroom window. It began to tap on it, a sharp nail making a clear sound on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Then it wailed. The maid, scared out of her wits, quickly shot up, noped out of the room, and ran upstairs to alert my neighbors. When she reached upstairs, the wailing had stopped, and my neighbors were awoken by their frantic maid. They slowly went down to check the dark ground floor. Unlike my house, their stairs met the dining room with a large sliding door. The sliding door directly faced that mango tree. The ground floor was dark and was only illuminated by the moonlight shone through the sliding door. Then they saw it. Or now it was them, because there were two figures under the tree, one the silhouette of a woman and the other of a child. My neighbor quickly turned on the lights, but the figures had vanished. The very next morning, the sun placed the mango fruit back under the tree. My late grandmother, Nana, had her share of supernatural happenings when she stayed with us. She was 70 years old and stayed at the guest room downstairs, as she was too old to sleep on the first floor. This was after our maid left. Every day she would be alone in the house as my parents went to work and me and my sister were at school. Each time I got home in the afternoon with my mom, we would find Nana sitting quietly in the living room, slightly pale. Later that day, she would complain to my dad that she heard footsteps upstairs, cupboards in the kitchen opening and closing, and she felt a presence watching her from the dark kitchen. Since Nana wasn't the nicest person to my mom, I always brushed it off thinking it was because of her old age, but my parents believed it to be real. As for me, a couple of years after staying there, I started to hear things as well. Maybe I wasn't sensitive enough to detect these things earlier on. 11 p.m. one night when everyone was asleep, I was getting ready for bed. After turning on the radio to a low volume for white noise, I closed my eyes and let slumber take over me. I was just about to doze off when a sharp scream rang out right next to my ear. It was shrill, like a woman being attacked inside my room. My eyes shot open, but my dark room appeared to be empty. My heart seemed to be running a marathon. I quickly got out of bed and turned on my lights. Maybe the radio had an advertisement, I thought, but the radio was playing softly. Then I made the dumbest decision in my life. I opened my bedroom door to check. Maybe my dad was watching TV. But I was greeted with the darkness of the hallway. The atmosphere was still and quiet. There was a tension in the dark that beckoned me to come outside. Instead, I closed the door and I slept with the lights on. After 3 years there, we moved out, but my last encounter at that place really freaked me out. After moving back to our own home, my mom's potted plants still hadn't been transported yet, so after picking me up from school, my mom made a quick detour to the house. We stopped by at the front gate, but my mother forgot to bring the automatic gate's keys. Since the plants were just outside, I offered to climb up the gate and pick them up. As I mentioned, we had neighbors on the left, but the house on the right had been empty for years. When I climbed up the concrete gate, I heard loud noises that made me stop mid-climb. Noises like someone was shaking a glass sliding door violently. I turned towards the noise and to my horror, it came from the empty house on the right. There, I saw the empty house's dining room sliding door being shaken in its entirety, like someone or something was angry that I was trespassing in the area. I broke from my frozen state, leaping off the concrete gate and running straight into the car. My mom, who had witnessed the event, quickly got in the car too and drove off. She turned to me and asked, "Are you all right?" My face was pale and my hand was shaking. I quietly replied, "Yeah, let's get out of here." It's been more than 10 years, and thankfully our current house is almost paranormal free. We do from time to time talk about the previous house. I'm glad we don't stay there anymore, and I hope the family that lives there now is safe and well. The Thing in My Woods, from Vaudriken. Not long ago, my friend Mix and I were exploring the woods near my house. We both had always felt off when we entered these woods. On this particular occasion, we decided to do a test someone told us about a while ago. We brought 2 compasses, placed them far enough that they wouldn't interfere with each other. The one on the right pointed diagonally to the left, and the one on the left pointed diagonally to the right, so that if you drew a line from them, they would meet a few feet away. We looked at each other and picked up the compasses. As we looked up, we both noticed a shadow around 30 feet away. We joked a little bit about it, but when we looked again, the thing had gotten closer. We tried to ignore it, continuing onward. I mean, we were in the woods. There were tons of different shadows around, so it didn't feel out of the ordinary to us. As we walked deeper into the woods, we heard a dog barking. It sounded like it was in the middle of the woods, so we drew our knives and began walking at a faster pace to find this dog. We knew that this forest was owned by someone, but there wasn't ever anything built in them, so someone's dog barking out here had never happened before. As we got closer to where we thought the dog was, it barked again and again. Every time it barked, it seemed to be further away from us. We decided to stop for a moment and look at our surroundings. That's when we heard footsteps, but they weren't next to each other. Each next step was in a new area. If the first step was in front of us, the next would be behind us. It didn't make sense. It did this until it had walked a circle around us of random steps. As we both tried to calm ourselves down, we heard a twig snap right behind us. We swung around, but found nothing. However, we knew something was watching us and probably following us. We decided to head back to my house, and right as we started walking, we heard those footsteps again. Panicking, we ran. Each time we sped up, the footsteps sped up as well, keeping pace with us. After we got out of the woods, I looked back, and I saw a shadow the size of a man. There was no face, only shadow. This wasn't the first time either of us had seen this thing, but that would be the last time we encountered it. We don't know what was in those woods, but we do know that nothing out there seems to be normal. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.